You know, when I was in law school, I used to study the law by looking at the books in the library, right? And I'm here at Barry University School of Law, and yeah, the students hit the books. But right now, they've got the biggest trial in the country in their backyard. And one way that they're learning about the law is by watching the law in action. And what I'm going to do now is meet with some of those students who are taking time out of their day here at the law school to watch the Casey Anthony trial and maybe pick up a few pointers from the lawyers and the judge and everything that's happening just a few miles down the road.
With whether Casey knew right from wrong.
So I guess it's back to school, back to class for me. We're going to go to an appellate advocacy class where the professor is Elizabeth McGalley. And she has a great story because she used to be a public defender. And guess who she's tried cases against? The prosecutor, Jeff Ashton. I'm going to go in here and talk to some of the students. So you've got the biggest trial in the nation in your backyard. So tell me one thing that you've learned from watching it.
Well, I've definitely learned how to behave at trial, how you get up when the procedural things by seeing a live trial like that. How the attorneys do objections and how they make motions.
I think the trial, the most surprising thing is definitely the decorum in the courtroom. I think the way that the attorneys have kind of held themselves is almost shameful in some respects. I think that they've done a great job defending, especially the defense and defending their client and prosecuting the case, but in some aspects you think, man, if I was to do this in a normal court with a normal judge and it wouldn't be televised, I'd be in jail. So I mean, some of the things that they've done. Outside of the case, of course, fighting to get tickets. That's the most ridiculous thing I've ever seen. But
it's a public trial.
Yeah. Just watching the lawyers in action and seeing what people can get away with, versus the theory we've been taught has really impressed me. So,
what's the lasting impression for you of the trial of the century in your backyard?
I think it's important to see that we need to have death qualified defense attorneys, and Jose Baez isn't the death qualified defense attorney in this case, and I think it's important that maybe they all are, because I mean, it's essential. This is she might be put to death for this. She needs every chance. I mean, she needs a really good representation in that case.
If Casey Anthony had been found incompetent, the trial would have to stop until she regains competency. And there's no telling when that would be. And so it would essentially be a mistrial.
Do they completely start over a new trial when defendants are found incompetent?
Yes. Yes. We've been using the Casey Anthony trial as an example of how to preserve the record for appellate purposes and what must be done at the trial level to ensure that a defendant who may end up being convicted has the right to appeal the case. We have talked about it. We meet twice a week. We usually talk about it at least once a week, if not twice a week. I tend to give my students an update on what has happened and procedurally what certain things mean. We have talked about the strategy of employing a death or qualifying a jury for the death penalty and how that can be a strategic move. Also, Florida statute doesn't prohibit a special verdict form. It's just not common practice to have a special verdict form. I don't think that at the end of the prosecution's case, the evidence against Casey was as strong as it has now become since the defense has started mounting its defense. And I think that that's disappointing from a defense background and a defense perspective. There are times when it's sometimes better to hold back a little bit, maybe not showing your full hand until the appropriate time, until you see what the state is able to put out there.
I'm Vinny Politan, and I host 3 different shows on 2 different networks, but right now, I'm just covering one story. I'm here in Orlando, Florida, which, when you think of Orlando, Florida as a tourist, you think of Mickey Mouse, Disneyland. I mean, people from all over the country, all over the world come here to enjoy themselves. But this spring and this summer, people are coming to Orlando for a different reason. They're coming down for the same reason I'm here, to see a trial. It's the case of Florida versus Casey Anthony. And it's taking place right here at the Orange County Courthouse in downtown Orlando. Now, this is a story that has gripped people for 3 years. The trial's taking place now, but the story started 3 years ago when a 2.5-year-old girl went missing. And the nation was searching for her. I mean, there are thousands of people that travel to this town, to Orlando, to look for this little girl. As it turns out, she was dead all along, and now her mom's on trial for that murder. But the investment that people made emotionally in that case 3 years ago still lives today, every day inside that courthouse. Now, for me, this story started 3 years ago in the search for this missing girl, Kaylee Anthony. And a lot of us looked at the circumstances and said it didn't add up, it didn't make sense. And investigators had the same sort of inklings. And the investigation went from a missing girl to a murder investigation of the mother. Now, what I want to do is I want to take you across the street, because you can see from here the number of news trucks that are here. And those are the locals. I mean, the interest here locally is incredible. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to take you across the street, and you can see sort of the setup that we have to cover the story the way that we're covering it each and every day. You know, you don't just show up with a little camera and say, all right, here's the trial. It takes a lot more, so I'm going to take you across the street. Right now we're across the street from the courthouse, and when you're covering a story in a case like this and you're reporting from the location, you need a background. You need the courthouse in the background so everybody knows you're here. And this is sort of the backside here. You can see all these locations here are all the different news outlets that have set up their live shots, so you can see the courtroom and the courthouse in the background of their shots. So they got to put them up on stilts. People have workspace underneath there, so all the producers and everyone else can prepare for what's going to take place on the air. The other part of the operation is, you know, luckily there was a lot here, an empty lot that now the media has taken over, but you need power. You've got a row of generators here, you've got trailers, facilities. It's the logistics of covering a story like this, because a trial day starts at 9 o'clock in the morning and doesn't end till 5. And the broadcast day from the location is going to go until 9 o'clock, 10 o'clock at night. So you need access to bathrooms and food and power and lights and energy. So all that is all taking place here. Now when you're sweating like me.
It's part of it. It's natural. It's raw.
Yeah. All right.
It's hot in Orlando.
Now, when you're covering a case like this, it's a trial. It starts in the morning, goes to the afternoon, but there are breaks. There's lunch breaks. There are sidebars when the attorneys are talking, but not out loud inside the courtroom. And that's an opportunity for us, and I'm a lawyer, to speak with our guests. We get people involved in the case, local attorneys who know and can explain to the viewer more about what's happening in the courtroom. And that's what we do from our studio up here, where we've got a desk. I'm going to show that to you as well. So inside the studio right now, the trial's actually taking place right now. So if you're reporting on it and you're not inside the courtroom because there's limited seating, plus you have obligations to be on the air, inside our studio you're able to monitor everything that's happening. And that's what my colleague is doing right now.
That there was some sort of accidental theory.
You can hear what's happening in the courtroom, you're taking notes, you're monitoring it, and you're ready to go on the air when it's time to go on. Let me take you to our workspace.
I would argue.
Sometimes I'm preparing for my show, I'm not in the courtroom, but I still got to know what's going on. And I still got to coordinate with all my producers back in Atlanta. So this is where I work at, right here. And you can see that folks are monitoring everything in the courtroom, sending notes back to all our producers. And in here, I just want to take a second here, and there's more space over here. Everybody's working. Everybody's working. We even have a mirror so you can see what you look like. I mean, it's 96 degrees in Orlando and humid. So you got to look good for TV. Now, during the course of this trial, there have been some, I would say, incredible moments. And you know, being on the set, you're watching it as it's taking place, getting ready to go on the air. And a few moments in this trial have really kind of taken me back a little bit. One was the opening statement where Jose Baez made the accusation that the defendant's father had been raping her since she was an 8-year-old girl. What a moment there, and what a game changer in the way people looked at this case, the evidence, and specifically the testimony of the father, trying to use this rape and this sexual abuse as an excuse to not tell anyone that your daughter had died. There was another moment when the remains of this 2.5-year-old girl were shown, and we on the air could not show it, and we wouldn't show it. We'd pixelate and obscure the photos, but I was in the courtroom for that moment. So that's why sometimes you got to be in the courtroom to get a feel for what's really happening in the case. And you saw those pictures and those remains, and there was duct tape at the scene with the skull. And a photograph like that made the prosecution theory make sense to me, but I couldn't show that picture on the air. But I was in the courtroom and I saw it, so I had to somehow explain to the viewer to make them understand what the evidence is, because when you're covering a trial, ultimately there's the human drama, but when it's time for a verdict, it's about the evidence. And my job is to make the viewer understand what that evidence is, explain to them what they can't see, and try to paint that picture for them, because some of the evidence is just too graphic to show on television, and we don't, and the judge doesn't want it to happen this way. It's a way of being respectful to the victim and the victim's family in this case. So this is pretty much where it all happens, and the biggest moment has yet to come, because the big preparations as a journalist in a trial is getting ready for the verdict. And that's when the most people will be watching, and that's the moment where you absolutely have to get it right. So, Casey Anthony and all the things that she did in those 31 days, all that insanity, Amy Huizenga with the checks, getting tattoos, how much of that information was coming out as you're covering this story?
It came out in dribs and drabs, a little bit at a time. But I think just overall, so many people had this visceral reaction when they find out that the sole provider for a toddler hadn't reported her missing for a month. That's just so contrary, and all the people we would talk to, especially parents of young children, it would become such a visceral, emotional kind of thing, because most of us who are parents, if your child was missing,
you're calling everybody.
Within, what, 20 minutes? 2 hours? You're pulling your hair out.
Yeah. You're jumping on top, up and down, screaming, hey, my child's missing.
Right.
Somebody
and that's
help
the
me
thing
here.
we would always hear time and time again is, why in the world did she wait a month to report her missing?
We're getting really close here to this area. Now, you were the first one to report about this. Roy Kronk.
Roy Kronk, yeah.
Roy Kronk plays a big role in this case.
Huge role.
Why is he here? Why is Roy Kronk? Look where we are. We're in the, side of the road. This place is a mess.
Sure.
What is Roy Kronk doing?
He would have neighborhoods that he would have to go check the meters, and it's all very well documented.
Okay.
And he's out walking the neighborhoods. There's really nowhere to go to the bathroom.
Right.
So, the day he actually found the remains, which were right down this little hill here, he said he had to relieve himself. And this happened to be the same area where 4 months earlier he had called and called and called.
Let's go down there.
You have to look at this in your mind's eye, what this is going to look like, far more grown up than it is now.
Well, in the summertime, everything's going to be thicker and grown out.
Right.
You had a lot of rain.
Right. And
Conditions
this, of course,
way different.
Right. It hadn't been all cut away in the investigation. And
so they've altered this. There's been some stuff that's cut away.
Oh yeah,
since they found the body?
this looked like the surface of the moon after they were done with it. It was stripped bare. So this is. I think it is very fair to say that this is absolutely ground zero for this case, in terms of, what was here, when was it here,
when, what, and
who put
when.
it here.
Yeah.
Right. And if you are the defense, you've got to find a way to make it work that these remains were put here after Casey was locked up on October 14th of 2008, because she hasn't gotten out since then.
All right. I wanted to go over to this tree because there's not much left here anymore in terms of a memorial, but I did notice that there's some Justice for Kaylee tags here with people from different places, I guess, paying their respects. Yeah. There was a lot more here.
There was just a ton of material here, and it became a big issue in this area with children going back and forth on the school bus. How much of this should they be exposed to? How much of this should stay up and for how long? This memorial was here for just months and months and months and months after the remains were discovered, until one night they just vanished.
Were you surprised when the discovery was made in this particular area?
Looking back on it, no. No, just because we had already heard so much about this area. If you believe the prosecution's theory that Casey had some sort of involvement, she had history here. She was, at least at some level, familiar with this area.
Here's a question I get all the time also. Why this story? Why does this story, this missing child, this murder investigation, so much bigger than all the others out there?
I think that's a valid criticism in terms of how this particular child, this particular case, has been blown up and out of proportion. And there's a lot of reasons why. Because she was a missing child first. And they were courting the media. They were needing the media coverage. They were going on HLN and they were saying, please give us the recognition. Please give us that because we need it. So right away, the nation became familiar with George and Cindy Anthony and Jose Baez and some of the investigators. And then, of course, at the center of it all, you have this little 2-year-old who I think we all can agree, we collectively should have done better for her. She deserved better. And now she deserves justice, whatever that justice is.
I thought I was doing really well, and we gave our guilty verdict, and I went home and just collapsed, and I was sick for a week and a half. So I thought better than when we were doing the penalty phase to make sure I took care of myself, because it takes a toll on your body you don't even realize, hearing these horrible and horrific things.
Yeah, I'm wondering, Maiko, did it affect you more too, considering the fact that you would go home but you wouldn't be able to talk about it?
Yeah, I think the biggest thing is not being able to talk about it. You'd have to hold all your emotions in. You wouldn't be able to, I couldn't discuss it with my wife. I couldn't discuss it with my mother, with any of my sisters.
Or neither us.
Yeah, or each other.
We
the
couldn't even
jurors
talk to each
ourselves. And, I have a 10-year-old daughter at home, so.
Wow. Yeah, who was roughly the age of Michaela.
Yeah, seeing the picture of Michaela was. We saw Jennifer Hawk Pettit first. They showed us that picture. Then they showed us Haley. And then Michaela, and I think we all just broke down after that. It was
horrible.
very hard.
No one should have
Very hard. No one should have to deal. Dr. Pettit shouldn't have to deal with this.
Was it hardest to see the pictures in that moment when you saw them, or afterwards when you were recalling it in your memory?
For me, it was memory, because it never leaves. It's there, and throughout the trial, you're reminded over and over again, and that is burned in my memory of those pictures of those girls, and God bless them.
Yeah, there's so much graphic testimony and pictures. Michael, I'm wondering what stuck with you most.
For me, definitely Michaela. Michaela was the one factor for me that I could not get over, and I've even unfortunately had nightmares about an 11-year-old girl screaming for my help, and I'm not able to help her. I've had a recurring dream, and it's horrifying. It never leaves you. It's something that you take with you every single day, and you hope that you can feel better about it, but it doesn't. It was so horrific, so heinous.
Were those the hardest things to come to terms with, do you think?
The pictures?
The pictures, the graphic testimony. I mean, what is it that has been, I guess, hardest for you to reconcile or process in this?
Looking at Stephen Hayes, how he showed no emotion throughout the entire trial. It was, for me, how can a human being show absolutely no remorse for what he had done? He had no emotion on his face throughout the entire trial.
An empty shell. He was a hollow eyes and an empty shell.
And I've heard the media report that he was smiling after the verdict. He didn't do anything after we read the verdict.
See that.
There was no smiles whatsoever. Nothing.
Let me ask you this. At any point, was the defense able to humanize this man for you?
I think so for me. And
at what point was it?
I think when they brought him, the defense attorney brought him close to the jury seating, and that really affected me because I had never seen him that close. And he's a human being, and none of us we all took this very seriously, and it is a man's life, and we're, in this country, we're not cannibals, or we're not, we're civilized, is what I mean.
Sure.
And so it was a tough, he's actually a human being, but he should never be let out. He should not.
He should never walk out in the street with society again. This individual, the reason that for me the death penalty was so important for him was because I know that he would be by himself in a cell, secluded from everybody else in that prison.
And he hated that.
And that's what he hated. But if he would have gotten life without the possibility of parole, he would have been in general population within a couple of years, and that's what he liked. That's what he was used to.
Was there any part, at any time, I guess, Michael, that you looked at Stephen Hayes and you saw him as a man as opposed to a perpetrator?
Unfortunately, I saw him as a perpetrator, and I recognize that he's a human being, and one thing I did recognize that every person has the right to a fair trial, and that's what was handed down. We gave him all fair opportunity, looking at through all the evidence. All of the jurors were absolutely phenomenal. They were professional. We were prudent with the decision that we made, and we recognized he was a human being. But for me, he was a perpetrator. He destroyed this family's life.
Early on, it broke my heart, thinking, what a tragic life. I mean, there's no winners in this, and it was a perfect storm of evil, and it did bother me because I'm a compassionate person, but after having listened to all the testimony and the pictures, there was really nothing. There was no other choice for all of us.
And we want people to know that we worked extremely hard in that deliberating room, looking at all the evidence. We followed the letter of the law to the T. We did exactly what Judge Blue told us to do. And I heard there was some criticism about us taking a couple of days, but we wanted to make sure that everybody was comfortable.